was still early morning when Lucia stepped out of the taxi in front of the airport. The wind was cold and she pulled her old brown coat closer around her shoulders. Her shoes were clean but worn from years of use. She looked like an ordinary woman, quiet and modest, the kind of person no one really notices in a crowd. She stood for a moment, watching the big glass doors of the terminal open and close as travelers rushed in with their rolling suitcases and fancy coats. Lucia smiled softly to herself. Her husband had booked this flight for her. He told her it was a surprise that she would travel in comfort this time. She didn't know all the details. She rarely asked about his business or how big it really was. All she knew was that he wanted her to take a little vacation, to visit her sister in another city and relax for a while. He said she had worked too hard for too long. She walked through the airport doors, her small handbag held tightly in her hand. The hall was full of people. Business travelers in suits, families dragging children, young couples taking selfies near the check-in counters. Lucia found the airline counter and joined the line. She looked up at the big screen where flights and numbers blinked in bright letters. Everything seemed so fast here. She was used to quiet mornings, to watering her garden or making breakfast at home, not standing in such a noisy, shiny place. When her turn came, she stepped forward and gave her passport to the young woman behind the counter. The woman smiled politely, though her eyes gave a quick, doubtful look at Lucia's clothes. "Good morning, ma'am. Where are you traveling today?" Lucia smiled. "To New York, please. Here's my ticket." She handed her phone with the digital booking her husband had sent. The woman tapped on her keyboard and then paused. Her smile slowly faded. "I see, you've booked a first-class ticket?" "Yes," Lucia replied gently. "My husband arranged everything." The woman blinked as if she wasn't sure she had heard right. She leaned closer to the screen, then back at Lucia. "Ma'am, are you sure this is correct? First class is quite expensive. Maybe you meant business or economy class?" Lucia shook her head with a kind smile. "No, I'm sure this is the right one. My husband said I should sit in first class this time. It's my first time flying like that." The woman's polite expression began to change into one of mild disbelief. She called to a colleague beside her, whispering something. The colleague looked over at Lucia, frowned slightly, and came closer to check the screen. "Can we see your booking confirmation again, ma'am?" the second staff member asked. Lucia unlocked her phone and showed them the email again. It clearly showed her name, the flight number, and first-class seat 2A. But the two employees exchanged a look that made Lucia's heart sink a little. The younger one forced a smile. "We'll just need to verify something quickly, ma'am. Please wait over there for a few minutes." Lucia nodded and stepped aside. She didn't want to cause trouble. She thought maybe it was just a system issue. She found a small corner near the counter and waited quietly, holding her phone. People passed by her, some glancing at her as if wondering why she stood there. She looked simple, maybe too simple for the part of the airport reserved for luxury travelers. Minutes passed. The line of passengers moved on. She watched as smartly dressed men in suits handed over their tickets and were guided smoothly to the gate. Nobody stopped them. Nobody questioned them. After about 15 minutes, Lucia went back to the counter, her voice calm but a little shaky. "Excuse me, is everything all right with my ticket?" The same woman looked at her again, now slightly impatient. "We're still checking, ma'am. There seems to be an issue. This type of ticket is unusual for your booking profile." Lucia frowned softly, not understanding. "Unusual? I'm not sure what that means." "It's just that your information doesn't match the profile we usually see for first-class passengers," the woman replied, lowering her voice. "We have to make sure the booking wasn't made by mistake." Lucia nodded slowly. "I understand," but deep inside her chest began to tighten. She felt eyes on her. A few passengers waiting in line whispered quietly, glancing her way. One older man smirked and muttered, probably trying to sneak in first class. Lucia heard it but pretended she didn't. She thought of her husband then, how calm and confident he always seemed. He had insisted she take this flight, that everything would be fine. "Don't worry about anything," he had said. "Just enjoy yourself." But now, standing there, she wished he had come with her. She tried calling him, but his number went straight to voicemail. He was likely in a meeting. After a while, another woman in a blazer came over. She looked like a supervisor. She spoke in a firm tone that carried authority. "Ma'am, could I please see your ticket and ID again?" Lucia handed them over quietly. The supervisor studied them for a moment, then looked Lucia up and down. This is a first-class ticket, yes. But we need to confirm how it was purchased. It's a very high-value seat. Lucia smiled nervously. My husband bought it. He said he made the payment through his account. Do you have proof of that? I only have the booking email, Lucia replied. I'm sorry, I don't know much about these things. The supervisor sighed softly. All right. Please wait here. We'll need a few more minutes. Lucia stepped aside again. This time she could feel people truly staring. Her simple clothes, her small handbag, her calm but confused face, it all seemed to make her stand out. She wasn't trying to cause any scene, but somehow, she had become the center of one. A mother walking by with her teenage daughter whispered, "That poor lady must have bought a fake ticket." The daughter giggled. Lucia pretended not to hear. She sat down on a nearby bench and looked at the floor, rubbing her hands together. She felt embarrassed, not angry, just small. The airport noise filled her ears, but it all sounded far away. After what felt like half an hour, the supervisor returned, still holding her documents. Ma'am, we're still not able to verify the purchase. Are you sure this wasn't booked through a travel promotion or with points? Lucia's eyes showed confusion. I really don't know. My husband told me he arranged everything himself. He even said the airline would take good care of me. The supervisor crossed her arms slightly. Do you mind sharing your husband's name? Lucia hesitated for a second. Her husband had always been a private man. He never liked showing off or talking about his wealth. Even she sometimes forgot how big his world was compared to hers. Still, she answered quietly. His name is Raphael. The supervisor typed something into her system. Raphael who? Lucia gave the full name. The woman froze for a second, looked at her screen again, but then quickly covered it and said, We'll need a few more minutes. Lucia nodded and sat back down, not knowing that the name she had just said was the same name printed on the airline's boardroom wall. As she waited, a few kind strangers came over. One man in a casual shirt said, Ma'am, don't worry. Sometimes they just make mistakes. You have your ticket. That's what matters, Lucia smiled gratefully. Thank you. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. But deep down she could feel the sting of how people had looked at her, how quickly they judged her, as if her clothes and face told her whole story. She had never cared much about appearance. She believed kindness and honesty spoke louder than fashion. But here, in this shining airport full of expensive watches and brand new suitcases, she felt invisible and out of place. After a long silence, the young employee came back again, holding her phone awkwardly. Ma'am, we're still waiting for approval. Would you mind sitting a little longer? The flight boards soon, but we can't let you in until we're sure. Lucia took a deep breath. Of course. I'll wait. She looked out the big window where the plane stood on the runway, silver against the morning light. One of those planes would take her to her sister soon. She just hoped they would let her board before it was too late. Behind the counter, the staff whispered again. There's no way she's flying first class. Look at her, one muttered. Maybe someone made a mistake with the booking code. The other replied, Well, if she really has that ticket, we'll find out soon enough. But it's odd. People like that don't usually fly here. Lucia didn't hear every word, but she could feel the tone. The quiet disbelief in their voices hurt more than any insult. She wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. She only wanted to take her seat, read her little book, and enjoy the flight her husband had planned with love. Her phone buzzed with a message from him. It said, Boarding should be easy. I told them you're coming. She smiled softly, not realizing that the people who were supposed to recognize her had already failed to do so. Minutes later, the boarding gate opened for first-class passengers. Lucia watched as one by one, people in suits and expensive scarves walked through without a problem. The staff smiled and greeted them warmly. Then Lucia tried to step forward too, ticket in hand. Ma'am, please wait, the young woman said firmly. We still haven't verified your booking. Please step aside, Lucia froze. The people behind her began to sigh impatiently. One woman muttered, Oh, please, just let her go to economy already. Lucia looked at the staff, her voice quiet and trembling a little. I don't understand. The seat says 2A. My name is there. What else do you need? The woman avoided her eyes. We're just doing our job, ma'am. Lucia nodded slowly, her face pale but calm. All right, I'll wait. She stepped back again, watching the door close behind the last first-class passenger. Sure, the world felt heavy on her shoulders, but she told herself to stay patient. She had faith that her husband's kindness and the truth would soon clear things up. She didn't know that outside the terminal. A sleek black car had just pulled up, and inside it was a man whose name was printed on every plane she saw out that window. And in just a few minutes, everything about that morning was going to change. Lucia stood quietly near the gate, holding her ticket in her trembling hands. The sound of people boarding filled the air. The cheerful greetings of attendants, the rolling of suitcases, and the chatter of excited travelers. But none of it reached her the same way anymore. All she felt was a quiet ache, the kind that comes when someone doubts your truth and there's nothing you can do to prove it. She looked down at her ticket again. Her name was right there, printed clearly. Seat 2A, first class, everything matched. Yet somehow she was the only one still standing outside while others enjoyed their comfortable seats inside the plane. One of the ground staff walked by and gave her a curious glance. He whispered something to another worker who laughed softly and shrugged. Lucia looked away, pretending not to notice. She didn't want to be seen as a problem. She didn't want pity either. Her phone buzzed again, a text from her husband. It said everything should be fine. Just show them the booking email. She sighed softly. She had already done that. She typed back, "They don't believe it's real." Then she slipped the phone back into her small purse and sat on a nearby bench. Time passed slowly. The large clock above the gate showed that the flight would close boarding soon. Lucia began to worry she might miss it altogether. A young man in a business suit sat a few seats away from her. He looked up from his laptop and asked kindly, "Excuse me, ma'am, are you waiting for this flight too?" Lucia nodded. "Yes, but there's a mistake with my ticket," they said. He looked surprised. "You have a first-class ticket?" "Yes," she said softly. "My husband bought it for me. He wanted me to travel comfortably." The young man smiled gently. "That's very nice of him. Maybe it's just a system issue. These things happen sometimes," Lucia smiled weakly. "I hope so." Just then, a flight attendant came out of the gate talking to one of the ground crew. Lucia overheard her say, "There's still one first-class seat open, right? We might have to give it to someone else if that lady's ticket doesn't check out." Lucia's heart sank. She didn't want to lose that seat. She didn't want to cause any trouble either. She stood up and went to the counter again. "Excuse me," she said politely. "I think boarding is almost finished. Could you please tell me if I can go in now?" The woman behind the counter looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we still don't have confirmation from the payment department. The system says the ticket was booked through a special account. We can't clear it until we hear back." Lucia frowned a little. "Special account?" "Yes," the woman said. "It looks like the payment came from a corporate system. Usually that means it's for an employee or a company partner." Lucia didn't fully understand, but she just nodded. "All right, I'll wait." Behind her, a few more passengers walked past and entered the plane. One woman gave Lucia a sympathetic look as if she could feel her embarrassment. Another man muttered under his breath, "People will do anything for a free upgrade these days." Lucia's hands tightened around her ticket. She wanted to explain herself, but there was no point. They had already made up their minds about her. She went back to her seat and sat quietly, trying to keep her thoughts calm. She thought about her husband again, how hard he worked, how busy his life was. She never asked for much from him, never cared about the expensive things he could afford. They lived simply, even though he was often surrounded by people with power and money. She liked her small kitchen, her flowers, her quiet home. That was enough for her, but today, for the first time, she felt how people judged her for not looking rich. After a few more minutes, a senior airline staff member, a man in a dark uniform, walked toward the counter. His badge said supervisor. He looked serious, as if he had already been told about the situation. He spoke to the employees quietly, then called out, "Excuse me, ma'am. You're the one with the first-class ticket?" Lucia stood up slowly. "Yes, that's me. Can I please see your documents again?" He asked politely but firmly. She handed him everything. He checked them carefully, typing something on his tablet. His eyes moved from the screen to Lucia, then back to the screen. "Ma'am," he said after a pause, "this ticket was purchased through a restricted business account. Can you tell me exactly who booked it for you?" "My husband," Lucia replied softly. "He said he made all the arrangements himself. Does he work for the airline?" Lucia hesitated. "I don't think so. But he does. He owns several companies. Maybe he used one of them." The supervisor frowned slightly. Do you know the name of the company? Lucia smiled awkwardly. I'm sorry, I don't remember. My husband takes care of all that. He nodded, clearly unsure what to do next. All right, please wait a little longer. I'll try to reach the finance team. Lucia thanked him quietly and sat down again. Her chest felt heavy. She tried not to cry, but the tears were there, hiding behind her patience. She opened her small handbag and took out a piece of paper. It was a handwritten note from her husband. Just a few words. You deserve the best seat always. She read it again and smiled faintly. That little note was enough to calm her heart. Meanwhile, the airline staff were growing restless. The gate time was closing and the plane was almost full. The supervisor spoke to someone over his headset. We have a passenger claiming ownership connection. The system lists the payment under the master account linked to the airline headquarters. I'm trying to confirm authenticity. Lucia didn't hear all that. She only saw the worried faces, the quiet pointing, the occasional glances in her direction. The young man from earlier spoke up from his seat nearby. Excuse me, he said to the staff. I can vouch for her. I saw her ticket myself. It's real. You can't just humiliate people like this. The woman behind the counter sighed. Sir, please stay out of this. We're following procedure. Lucia turned to the young man and smiled gently. Thank you, but it's all right. I'll be fine. He nodded, frustrated. You shouldn't have to be treated like this just because of how you look. Lucia didn't respond. She just looked out the window again, watching the sky. The clouds were moving slowly, peaceful and far away from all this noise. The clock kept ticking. The supervisor checked his watch and muttered, We can't delay boarding much longer. Lucia felt a wave of worry. She didn't want to miss the flight. She stood up and said quietly, Please, if there's any problem, I can take another seat. I don't mind. I just want to reach my destination. The supervisor looked at her kindly now, realizing how humble she was. Ma'am, please wait. Let me make one more call. He walked a few steps away, dialing a number. Lucia could see his face change as he spoke to someone important. His posture straightened. He looked nervous now, nodding quickly and saying, Yes, sir. I understand, sir. Then he froze. His eyes widened slightly as he listened to the voice on the other end. Lucia didn't know it, but at that very moment, the person he was speaking to was none other than her husband's assistant, who had just answered the call from the company headquarters. The supervisor hung up slowly and turned back toward Lucia. He walked to her with a strange, almost cautious expression. Ma'am, he said gently, I deeply apologize for the misunderstanding. There seems to have been some confusion in the system. You can board now. Your seat is ready. Lucia looked surprised but smiled with relief. Thank you so much. I appreciate your help. The staff at the counter looked puzzled. The younger woman whispered, Did you find out who she is? The supervisor only said, You'll understand soon enough. Let her through. Lucia gathered her things, bowed her head politely, and walked toward the gate. The young man who had defended her smiled and gave her a thumbs up. She smiled back and thanked him softly before entering the tunnel leading to the plane. As she stepped into the aircraft, a flight attendant greeted her with a warm smile, though there was a flicker of confusion when she saw Lucia's simple clothes. Still, she led her to seat 2A, a wide, luxurious seat with soft lighting and a warm blanket folded neatly on top. Lucia sat down slowly, her heart still racing from all that had happened. She ran her hand over the seat's armrest, amazed at the smooth leather. It felt unreal to her, too fancy, too far from her simple life. She closed her eyes and whispered a small prayer of thanks. She didn't care about the looks or whispers anymore. She was just grateful to finally be seated, but back at the gate the staff were still murmuring among themselves. The young employee asked the supervisor again, Sir, who was that woman, really? The supervisor gave a quiet sigh and said, You'll find out soon. Let's just say she has a closer connection to this airline than anyone else in this building. The others looked confused but didn't dare ask more. Inside the plane, Lucia looked out the window as the engines began to hum. The runway lights blurred into streaks as the aircraft prepared to take off. She smiled softly, thinking about how much her husband would laugh if he knew how complicated her morning had been. She imagined telling him about it, how everyone doubted her, how they almost gave away her seat. He would probably shake his head and say, You. See, this is why I never like people judging by appearance. The flight attendant offered her a drink and Lucia thanked her kindly. She wasn't angry anymore. She was just tired. She wanted to rest, to forget the stares and whispers and to enjoy this quiet moment above the clouds. Outside, the plane lifted off the ground, rising smoothly into the blue sky. The city below became smaller and smaller until it was just a blur of lights. Lucia watched it disappear, feeling a peaceful smile return to her face. She didn't know that far below. Her husband had already received a message from his assistant saying, "Sir, there was an issue with your wife's boarding. The staff didn't recognize her. The situation is being handled." And the moment he read those words, his calm expression slowly changed. The story of what happened next would soon travel far beyond that small airport hall. The plane had leveled off, and the soft hum of the engines filled the cabin. Lucia leaned back in her luxurious first-class seat, her hands folded gently on her lap. She could feel the softness of the leather and the warmth of the blanket draped across her knees. But even amid the comfort, her mind kept replaying the morning's events. How strange it had been to be doubted, questioned, and even whispered about as though she had done something wrong. She tried to push the thoughts away and focus on the clouds outside. They stretched endlessly, white and soft like a calm sea. For a moment she imagined floating on them, far from all the whispers, the stares, and the doubt. She thought about her husband and the small note he had left her. "You deserve the best seat always." The words made her smile quietly. She didn't care about the money or the luxury. The thought that he had taken care of everything for her made her feel loved and appreciated. Back at the airport, the gate staff were still talking in hushed tones. The younger woman, who had first questioned Lucia, leaned toward her colleague. "I still don't understand. How did she get that ticket? It's from a corporate account, but it doesn't match her profile at all." The supervisor, who had finally allowed her to board, said nothing at first. He looked troubled, glancing at his phone repeatedly. Then he whispered, "We might have a serious problem if this passenger's name is correct. We need to contact headquarters immediately." In the meantime, Lucia was offered a drink by the flight attendant. She chose a cup of tea and held it with both hands, sipping slowly, trying to calm her racing heart. Her eyes wandered around the cabin. Passengers in first class were chatting quietly, laughing softly and enjoying their meals. Nobody seemed to notice her much, which was fine. She liked the quiet and preferred to remain unobtrusive, but her peace was about to change. A man in a dark suit walked toward the cockpit. He was not the captain. He carried himself differently. He seemed important, someone from the airline's management, but also calm, composed, and authoritative. The flight attendants immediately straightened, whispering to each other as he passed. He walked directly to the back of the first-class cabin and paused. His eyes landed on Lucia. For a moment the man studied her quietly and she felt a strange shiver run down her spine. He wasn't smiling or frowning. He just looked carefully as if trying to remember something. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Meanwhile, the flight attendants were now alert. One whispered to another, "That's the regional manager. He's here for a surprise inspection. I don't think he knows the passenger yet." Lucia, still holding her tea, felt her heart beat faster. She didn't know why, but something told her this moment was unusual. She didn't move, didn't speak, just waited quietly. The man approached the gate area and the supervisor's phone rang again. He answered immediately. "Yes, sir," he said. His eyes widened as he listened and he took a deep breath. "Understood. Yes, we'll handle it right away." He hung up and turned to the staff with a serious expression. "Everyone, step back. We need to handle this personally." Back in the cabin, the man, now closer to Lucia, looked at her name on the seat assignment. His face went still. He whispered something to the flight attendant, who nodded and led him toward her. Lucia looked up as the man stopped in front of her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely. "May I ask you a few questions?" "Yes, of course," she replied softly, a little nervous. "Could you tell me who booked this ticket for you?" "My husband," she said calmly. "He arranged everything himself. He said I should enjoy a comfortable flight." The man nodded slowly, looking at her again. Then he typed something quickly into his phone. He glanced around nervously, lowering his voice as he spoke to the flight attendant. "It matches. It really is her." Lucia tilted her head slightly. "Excuse me?" "I don't understand." The man gave her a polite smile. "You may want to remain seated." "Everything is fine, but I think you are about to be very much noticed." Lucia didn't have time to ask more. The flight attendant came over and gently said, Ma'am, we need to make a small announcement. Please remain calm. The cabin quieted as the captain's voice came over the intercom, warm and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special passenger on board today. We kindly ask for your attention. Lucia felt her stomach tighten. She had no idea what was about to happen. The captain continued. Sometimes appearances can be misleading. Today is a reminder that we should never judge anyone by what we see. Our passenger in seat 2A is someone very important to our airline. Whispers began to ripple through the cabin. Passengers turned to look at her, their eyes wide with curiosity. Some even started taking out their phones. Lucia's cheeks turned slightly pink. She held her hands together, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. The regional manager stepped closer now, standing politely beside her seat. He spoke in a low voice, just enough for her to hear. Ma'am, it seems many people are surprised to learn your identity. Would you like to say a few words? Lucia shook her head gently. No, that's all right. I'm just a passenger trying to enjoy the flight. The manager nodded and smiled. Very well. But I think it's important for everyone to know that appearances do not always tell the truth. By now, the first-class passengers were murmuring among themselves. One woman whispered, I can't believe it. She's the owner's wife? Lucia kept her head down slightly, trying to remain calm. She had never enjoyed attention, and certainly not this kind of recognition. She was just a simple woman. Someone who liked quiet mornings, flowers, and making tea for herself and her husband. She did not feel like a person who belonged on the front page of a business story or in the spotlight. A few passengers approached, offering apologies or polite smiles. I'm sorry, one said quietly. We judged too quickly. Lucia shook her head softly. It's all right. I understand. People only see what they want to see sometimes. The man beside her, the regional manager, whispered, Your composure is remarkable. Most people in your position would be angry or embarrassed. You handled this with dignity. Lucia smiled faintly. I only want people to be treated kindly. That's all? The flight attendants now offered her a special welcome package, a gesture of apology and respect. She accepted it politely, keeping her voice soft and gentle. Meanwhile, back at the airport, the staff who had questioned her earlier received calls from headquarters. Their faces turned pale as they learned the truth. The name on the ticket matched the wife of the airline's owner, a fact they had completely overlooked. In the cabin, a flight attendant whispered to another, I can't believe we almost delayed her. She's the reason this airline exists. Lucia overheard but only smiled quietly. She didn't need to speak. Her simple presence, calm demeanor, and quiet confidence said more than words could. The plane began to cruise at a smooth altitude. Lucia looked out of the window at the vast sky, feeling a mixture of relief and wonder. She thought about how strange it was that a single morning could make her feel so small, and then so recognized, all within a few hours. The regional manager stayed nearby, checking in once or twice to make sure she was comfortable. Every time he spoke to her, he did so with respect and quiet admiration. Lucia's thoughts returned to her husband. She imagined him reading the messages from the staff, realizing how they had almost embarrassed her without knowing who she was. She smiled softly, thinking of how he would quietly laugh at the whole situation later. He had always been calm, confident, and strategic, never rushing to anger or judgment. And now, in a way, he had left her to handle this herself, to show the world her patience and grace. As the hours passed, the cabin settled into a peaceful routine. Passengers sipped drinks, read quietly, and looked out the windows. But a subtle energy remained, a quiet recognition that something unusual and important had happened. Lucia leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes for a few moments. She let out a deep breath, feeling the tension from the morning slowly melt away. She thought about the lesson in all this, that appearances can be misleading, that patience and calmness matter, and that dignity is stronger than judgment or scorn. Somewhere below, at the airport, the gate staff were still murmuring among themselves. The supervisor had a long conversation with his team, reminding them never to judge a person by their appearance again. The story of what happened was already spreading quietly, though it had not yet reached the public. But inside the plane, Lucia only thought about the clouds, the soft hum of the engines, and the warmth of the seat beneath her. She felt a small smile appear on her face. She had endured the embarrassment and confusion, yet here she was, calm and unshaken, surrounded by quiet luxury and understanding. And she knew in her heart that the events of this morning would be remembered not for the confusion or whispers, but for the lesson she had shown everyone through her simple, patient, and graceful presence. The plane hummed steadily as it soared above the clouds. Inside the first-class cabin, the soft lighting created a warm and calm atmosphere. Lucia sat quietly in her seat, her hands folded gently over the blanket. She still felt a little nervous, though it was no longer the nervousness of fear or embarrassment. Now it was more like the quiet anticipation of what would happen next. The regional manager stayed nearby, occasionally checking in to ensure she was comfortable. He didn't speak loudly, but the way he watched over the cabin hinted that something important was unfolding. A few passengers who had glanced at her earlier whispered quietly among themselves. "Can you believe it? She's the owner's wife," one said. Another shook their head in disbelief. No wonder the staff were so confused. Lucia overheard the whispers but didn't react. She didn't need to. She was used to staying calm in difficult situations. She had never liked being the center of attention, and she certainly had no desire to make anyone feel embarrassed or judged. She simply wanted to enjoy the flight and let the morning's events fade into the past. Back at the airport, the gate staff were still processing what had happened. The supervisor had called headquarters again and confirmed everything. The truth was clear. The woman they had doubted, questioned, and almost humiliated was the wife of the airline's owner. The realization hit them hard. The younger staff member who had first questioned Lucia's ticket looked pale. "I can't believe we treated her like that," she whispered. "I was so sure. I judged her by her clothes." The supervisor nodded slowly. "It's a mistake we'll never forget. We need to make sure this never happens again. Every passenger deserves respect regardless of how they look." Inside the cabin, a flight attendant approached Lucia with a polite smile. "Ma'am, we'd like to apologize for any discomfort you experienced earlier. Please let us know if there's anything you need." Lucia smiled softly. "Thank you. That's very kind of you. I appreciate it." The regional manager leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "Your patience has been remarkable. Most people in your position would have been upset or frustrated. You've handled everything with grace." Lucia looked at him calmly. "I only want people to be treated kindly. That's all?" He nodded, clearly impressed. "And you've reminded all of us of that lesson today." As the flight continued, the staff began to approach her one by one. Each offered a quiet apology. "I'm sorry," one said. "I judged too quickly. It was wrong of me." Lucia nodded gently to each one. She didn't need to speak words of forgiveness. Her calm acceptance said it all. Meanwhile, some passengers who had been watching the situation unfold whispered among themselves. "She's so calm," one said. "Even after everything, she hasn't lost her composure." Another nodded. "It's inspiring. Most people would have been upset or angry. She handled it with dignity." Lucia listened quietly to the murmurs but didn't react. She didn't seek recognition. She only felt relief that the confusion had been resolved. The regional manager spoke quietly to the flight attendants. "Make sure she's comfortable for the rest of the flight. Offer her anything she might need. She deserves it." The attendants nodded and moved quickly to ensure her comfort. A warm meal was brought to her seat, carefully prepared and beautifully presented. A soft blanket was draped over her shoulders, and a selection of teas and drinks was offered. Lucia thanked them politely, her voice calm and gentle. She took a sip of tea and looked out the window. The clouds stretched endlessly beneath the plane, white and soft. She took a deep breath, letting the quiet peace of the sky fill her heart. After a while, the regional manager returned. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "the staff at the gate have been informed. They know now who you are, and they're deeply sorry for how they treated you. We've made sure that every employee understands the importance of respect, regardless of appearances." Lucia smiled softly. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful." The flight attendants continued to check on her, offering small comforts and ensuring she was at ease. Every gesture was done with care and respect, a stark contrast to the confusion and doubt she had faced just hours before. The regional manager watched quietly as she settled into her seat. He could see the calm determination in her eyes, the quiet dignity that radiated from her. He had worked in the airline industry for years, seen countless passengers, but few had left such an impression. Lucia leaned back, her hands resting gently on the blanket. She thought about the morning, the embarrassment, the whispers, and the doubt. She thought about how quickly people had judged her based on her appearance, without knowing anything about her or her life. And she realized that even though it had been difficult, it had also been a lesson, for herself and for everyone around her. She didn't need to speak. Her calm presence and quiet grace were enough to show the truth, that appearances could be misleading, that kindness and patience were more powerful than judgment or scorn. As the flight continued, some passengers began to approach her quietly, offering smiles and small apologies. "I'm sorry for the way things were handled earlier," one said. "I shouldn't have assumed anything." Lucia nodded gently. "It's all right. People make mistakes. What matters is how we learn from them." The cabin settled into a peaceful rhythm. Passengers read quietly, sipped their drinks, or looked out the window at the endless sky. The staff moved with care and attention, ensuring everyone's comfort. And through it all, Lucia remained calm, serene, and composed. At one point, the regional manager leaned closer and whispered, "Ma'am, I've seen many passengers in my career, but very few have handled a situation like this with such dignity. You've reminded all of us what true grace looks like." Lucia smiled softly. "Thank you. I just hope people remember to treat others with kindness no matter what they look like." He nodded, clearly moved by her words. "They will. And we'll make sure of it." As the hours passed, the plane continued to glide smoothly above the clouds. Lucia enjoyed the soft hum of the engines, the gentle rocking of the cabin, and the peaceful atmosphere. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the confusion had been resolved and that the lesson had been learned by everyone involved. The flight attendants continued to check on her, offering small comforts and ensuring her needs were met. She accepted their gestures with quiet gratitude, never making a fuss, never drawing attention to herself. Passengers who had once whispered and judged her now looked at her with admiration. Some nodded quietly, acknowledging her patience and calm. Others whispered among themselves, sharing how remarkable it was that she had handled everything without anger or complaint. Lucia felt a sense of peace settle over her. She didn't need recognition or praise. She only wanted to live her life with dignity, kindness, and patience, and today she had done exactly that. The regional manager stayed nearby, observing the cabin and ensuring everything was in order. He could see the calm confidence in Lucia's eyes, the quiet strength in her posture. He knew that she had taught everyone around her a valuable lesson, one that they would not soon forget. As the plane continued its journey, the staff at the airport received updates from the cabin. They learned that Lucia was calm, comfortable, and gracious. They were deeply ashamed of how they had treated her earlier, and they began to reflect on their own behavior. Inside the plane, Lucia thought about her husband. She imagined him reading the messages from the staff, realizing how they had almost embarrassed her without knowing who she was. She smiled softly, thinking of how he would quietly laugh at the whole situation later. She didn't care about the luxury, the attention, or the recognition. What mattered to her was that people had learned a lesson about respect, patience, and kindness. That they had been reminded that appearances could be misleading and that dignity was more powerful than judgment. As the flight continued, the cabin settled into a quiet, peaceful rhythm. Passengers read quietly, enjoyed their meals, and looked out the window at the endless sky. The staff moved with care and attention, ensuring everyone's comfort. And through it all, Lucia remained calm, serene, and composed, a quiet example of grace and patience. By the time the plane began its descent, the cabin was filled with a sense of calm respect. Passengers who had once judged now looked at her with quiet admiration. The staff moved with care, ensuring her comfort and safety. And Lucia, in her quiet and simple way, had reminded everyone of a lesson they would not soon forget, that kindness, patience, and dignity were far more important than appearances. As the wheels touched the runway and the plane slowed, Lucia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the confusion had been resolved, that respect had been restored, and that the lesson had been learned by everyone around her. And as she prepared to step off the plane, she knew that her quiet presence, calm demeanor, and patient grace had left a mark that would be remembered far beyond this flight. Lucia stepped off the plane and onto the jet bridge, her small handbag resting gently on Hugh. Her arm, The cabin crew smiled warmly and gave her polite nods of respect. She felt a quiet sense of relief. The flight had been smooth, the discomfort of the morning finally behind her. Yet as she walked toward the airport exit, she realized the story was far from over. Even though she had quietly endured the embarrassment at the gate, word of the situation had already begun to spread among the airline staff. Employees whispered in the hallways, sharing the story of the simple woman who had been doubted only to discover she was the owner's wife. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others in embarrassment at their own quick judgments. Lucia had no desire to be the center of attention, but attention had found her anyway. She moved calmly through the arrival hall, noticing the subtle glances of people who had heard the story. Some were curious, some respectful, and some quietly apologetic. She offered polite nods or small smiles, never drawing unnecessary attention to herself. Outside the terminal, a black car waited quietly. Her husband had sent it, though he was still at a meeting. The driver opened the door for her and she slipped inside with a soft, grateful smile. The interior of the car was quiet and comfortable. She leaned back against the leather seat and took a deep breath, letting the events of the day wash over her. The car moved smoothly through the morning traffic. Lucia thought about the airport staff and passengers who had whispered and doubted her. She did not feel anger toward them. Instead, she felt a quiet hope that the lesson had been learned, that people would remember that kindness and respect were far more important than appearances. Her husband arrived at the house a few hours later. He did not rush inside or make a scene. He simply opened the door, saw her standing there, and smiled softly. "I heard about the morning," he said quietly, his voice calm. Lucia smiled back, gentle and composed. "It was interesting," she replied lightly. She had no desire to dwell on the embarrassment. What mattered was that she had endured it with patience and dignity. He stepped closer and handed her a small note, folded neatly. She opened it and read the words he had written. "You reminded me what real class means." Her eyes softened and she smiled quietly. The note was simple, but it spoke volumes. It acknowledged not wealth, power, or appearances, but the quiet strength she had shown in the face of judgment. Over the next few days, the story quietly spread beyond the airport staff. Security footage and witness accounts circulated online, showing the moment when she had been questioned, her calm demeanor, and the reactions of the airline employees once the truth had been revealed. People were fascinated by her patience and dignity. Many shared the story, praising her for handling the situation with grace rather than anger. Lucia did not seek recognition. She had no desire to become famous or to make headlines, but people admired her quietly from afar. Social media posts described her as a model of calm and an example of true dignity. Comments poured in from strangers, expressing how inspired they were by her ability to remain kind, patient, and composed in a difficult situation. Meanwhile, the airline's management began reviewing the events of the morning. Staff members who had doubted or questioned her were called into meetings. The supervisor at the gate spoke to each employee individually, reminding them that every passenger deserved respect, regardless of how they looked or what they wore. The airline introduced new training programs to emphasize empathy, patience, and professionalism. Lucia did not attend these meetings. She preferred to stay in her quiet routine, tending to her home and garden, making small meals, and enjoying simple moments of peace. She had no desire to witness the changes or the apologies directly. She knew that her calm presence had already made the difference. A few employees who had felt particularly guilty sent personal notes to her through the airline. One wrote, "I am deeply sorry for how I treated you. I judged too quickly. Your patience and grace have taught me an important lesson." Another wrote, "I hope you forgive our mistakes. You reminded me that dignity and kindness matter more than appearances." Lucia read each note quietly and smiled softly. She did not reply with harsh words or lectures. She simply acknowledged them in her heart, believing that the lesson had been learned. She felt no need for recognition. Her reward was knowing that others had grown from the experience. Her husband watched all of this quietly, admiring her calm strength. He had been concerned when he heard about the confusion at the airport, but he had trusted her patience and dignity to handle the situation. Now, seeing the impact she had made on people, he felt a quiet pride and admiration for her. One evening, as they sat together quietly at home, he spoke softly. You showed everyone something they should never forget. It wasn't about wealth or status. It was about who you are. Lucia looked at him and smiled. I just wanted people to be treated kindly. That's all. He reached out and took her hand gently. You have reminded me that true class is not about luxury or power. It's about patience, kindness, and grace. You taught that lesson without even trying. In the weeks that followed, the story continued to inspire people. Some wrote letters, others sent emails, and many shared their experiences online. They spoke about how they had been reminded to treat people with respect, how appearances could be misleading, and how patience could transform difficult situations into lessons of humanity. Lucia continued her quiet life. She went to the market, visited her sister, and tended to her garden. She never boasted about the incident, never used it for attention. She had lived a simple life all along, and that simplicity remained intact. The luxury and recognition she experienced were secondary. What mattered most to her was that people had learned something important about respect and dignity. The airline also began highlighting the importance of kindness in its internal programs. Staff members shared the story of the woman who had been questioned yet handled the situation with grace, emphasizing the importance of treating every passenger with respect. It became a quiet but powerful lesson throughout the company. Lucia's husband, often busy with meetings and business decisions, took a little more time to appreciate the small things. He noticed how people treated his wife with genuine respect, not because of her position, but because of the quiet strength she carried within her. He realized that her patience and dignity had set a standard far higher than any rule or policy could. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over their garden, he handed her a small gift, a simple notebook with her initials on the cover. For your thoughts, he said softly. Your patience and wisdom deserve to be remembered. Lucia smiled, opening the notebook to a blank page. She did not need to fill it with stories or achievements. She simply wanted to capture quiet moments, reflections, and thoughts about kindness. The notebook became a place for her gentle observations, small lessons, and notes of gratitude. The morning of the incident remained in her mind, but it no longer caused embarrassment or discomfort. Instead, she remembered it as a turning point, a moment when patience, dignity, and kindness had been tested, and when her quiet strength had left a lasting impact. The story also spread to friends and family, who admired her calm and composed handling of the situation. They spoke of her example of quiet patience, of teaching a lesson without anger or resentment, and of showing that true dignity came from within, not from appearances or wealth. Lucia continued to live her life with the same simplicity and calm. She did not change her routines, did not seek attention, and did not expect praise. But quietly, she had influenced many, from airline staff to strangers online, to her own husband, reminding everyone of the importance of respect, patience, and human kindness. One day, she received a small message from one of the airline employees. I just wanted to say thank you, it read. Your calmness and grace that day changed the way I treat every passenger. I'll never forget it. Lucia smiled softly, touched by the message. She wrote a brief reply. I'm glad it helped. Remember, kindness costs nothing, but it changes everything. Her husband watched her quietly as she wrote. He felt a deep sense of admiration and love. She had reminded everyone, not through wealth, status, or influence, but simply through her calm, patient, and kind nature, that the world was better when people treated each other with respect. And in that quiet moment, with the evening light spilling softly across their home, Lucia felt a deep sense of peace. She had faced doubt, whispers, and embarrassment. She had remained calm, composed, and dignified. She had taught a lesson without raising her voice, without demanding recognition. The world outside continued on, but the impact of that morning rippled quietly through the lives of many. People had learned to pause, to observe without judgment, and to treat everyone with respect, no matter their appearance. Lucia returned to her simple routines, tending her garden, making tea, and enjoying quiet mornings. She never sought attention, never flaunted her status, and never let the incident define her. But quietly, her patience and dignity had changed the hearts of many. Her husband often reflected on that day, realizing how powerful her calm presence had been. He had always known her kindness, but seeing it tested and proven in such a public way reminded him of the quiet strength she carried.